Okay, yeah, I'm gonna do that. And then I'm gonna have everybody on waiting list. But
yeah. You can let us in early.
Correct.
We
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay.
Hey, Greg. Hey, Greg. You are muted, so on mute. Okay, I can hear you now.
All right,
And
this is
I
Judy.
see
It
the
looks
video
like
now.
you're recording already.
Yeah, we'll have to trim the video.
You can't pause the recording for right now.
Oh, I can.
He's a local iron smith, and that will be installed probably over the next 2 months. As we walk around, you can see it kind of going towards, we're looking eastward down the BeltLine. You can see some of the pitcher plants are already being placed out, which is pretty exciting. Now, other plants, as Mark's going to tell you, come in plant and are in bogs, include orchids and grasses and all kinds of beautiful flowering perennials. But a lot of these plants are threatened in the state of Georgia, and some of them, some of them are so rare that they can't even leave the state. But Mark could probably get into some of that detail as I talk to him, as they're probably getting bored of hearing from me, and my voice is getting kind of raspy. So. We're gonna start talking to Mark right here amongst all these wonderful plants. And Mark's probably gonna go on. I might just lead it with a few questions. But Mark, come on up. I've known Mark for quite a long time. He's actually grows bog plants. He's also, I know him because of all the orchids he grows. There's a lot of wonderful plants and orchids. He's part of the a major part of the Orchid Society in Georgia, and a really great, knowledgeable guy. But I want to start, Mark, because a lot of people are going to look at the plants behind you, and it's really wonderful. They're beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit how you got into growing plants? I know you did it really early, so talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, hi, I'm Mark Reinke, and I'm almost 64 years old, but I started growing Sarracenia or pitcher plants, insect-eating plants, when I was about 14. And at the time, I lived in Florida, and I started. It was very hard to find them available for sale, but I found a place in upstate New York that gave me a few little rhizomes, and that's how I started my collection. Then as I became an adult, I started going on rescue missions because we call these bog plants, but here in the South, they actually grow most commonly in wet pine savannas or fens. And fens are saturated open areas where there's movement of the water, where it isn't actually still. In a bog garden, this is a bog garden because the water is still, it doesn't drain anywhere. So they are creating a bog garden. And in New England, the one species of Sarracenia or pitcher plant that grows up there does grow in bogs. So I started as a teenager growing them, and as an adult I started collecting from rescue missions where they were going to destroy the habitat, because the main reason we are losing these plants in the wild is habitat destruction. A couple of different ways. Development, where it was kind of open land that has become a Walmart. I mean, truly this has happened. Or a gas station. That's very common in the Florida Panhandle and the Carolina coast. But also inland in the pine savannas, the paper producing companies buy the land and they ditch it to lower the water table, because in a wet pine savanna, pine trees don't grow that well. They're kind of widely spaced. It's fairly open. And so they'll ditch it, and suddenly the habitat is lost and the plants will just die away. They're also fairly dependent on periodic fire in those pine savannas that clears out the underbrush. So where there are managed populations in the wild, they do prescribe burn every so many years to clear out the underbrush. And after burn, you would just be amazed at the growth that these things put on. So Sarracenia grow as far west as eastern Texas and as far north as Canada. But most of the species are confined to the southeastern quadrant of the United States, either in the Appalachian Mountains or near the coast. They kind of require acidic conditions, openness where they get lots of sunshine, and a high water table where it never totally dries out. So if you don't have all those three things permanently, you can't grow them. But in those situations, they grow like weeds. Truly, they are very, very vigorous plants. And each plant, which comes from seed, has an indefinite lifespan. So if that environment is maintained indefinitely, the plant will grow indefinitely. It'll just become a larger and larger clump. You could think of a Sarracenia as an iris plant, in the sense that it comes from a rhizome, and the rhizome is a horizontal root structure that begins to branch at the tip as it gets older and slowly goes in all directions, kind of like an iris plant.
Mark, what do you growing these plants in?
I grow them in sand with a little bit of peat moss to make it acidic, because they need that lower pH level. We're going to have a train competing with us in a minute here. And the moss that you see in these pots just occurred naturally. It came in on the wind, except for this type of moss. This is sphagnum moss, and it's a common occurrence in fens, bogs, and pine savannas. It's a unique type of moss that wicks up water from below, so it always stays wet on top.
So Mark, I was saying sphagnum earlier. What is peat? How does peat and sphagnum?
Peat is decayed sphagnum moss. So in a peat bog, there's a layer of live sphagnum moss on the top, and deep down underneath, where it has decayed over decades, even centuries, is peat moss. They're actually, some peat moss is sustainably collected, some is not. In Canada, they're kind of going overboard and collecting it down to the point where it can't replenish in some
Don't
locations.
get peat from Canada.
Yeah, it'd be best to get peat that is sustainably produced. You really don't need much, especially here in this part of the world. Our water is acidic, our rainfall is slightly acidic, the ground tends to be acidic, so the elements are already there to make the plants happy. You just wouldn't want to plant them in like crushed limestone. That's the opposite end of the scale. That's a high pH, and they would not do very well.
So can you talk to us a little bit about some of the other plants here? How many different, well, first of all, how many different pitcher plants do we have growing in Georgia coast? And how many do you have, are we going to be planting today?
Yeah, Georgia has 4 or 5 of the 7 known species, maybe a little bit more than that. Some are almost not occurring in Georgia anymore, like the white top pitcher plants. They used to be in extreme southwest Georgia. There may still be, this is a cross that has the white top pitcher plant in it. This is more typical of a what the natural ones look like. And they were in very southwest Georgia. They're very common in the Florida Panhandle and southern Alabama, but just a little bit of Georgia, and they're pretty rare now. Flava is probably the most common species in Georgia. You can find extensive stands. I know of a power line cut in South Georgia where you can see to the horizon. There's that much of it if they haven't started herbiciding it instead of mowing it.
I've heard there's a lot of great pitcher plant bogs along power line easements. Is that right?
Well, those that they mow, unfortunately, power line companies have started herbiciding instead of mowing, and they're destroying the environment they created. But yeah, they created this wonderful natural open space in where the trees had grown up everywhere else. But now that they're herbiciding many of them, so I don't know if that one still exists in South Georgia or not. Let's see what else. This actually right here, this is Sarracenia purpurea subspecies venosa. Now these are old leaves from the previous year, and this is extremely rare down to one population in the state of Georgia, but still exists. You also have various forms of rubra. Sarracenia rubra is tubular and small, and it's often known as a sweet pitcher plant because it's one of the few that has fragrant flowers. So there's small flowers that actually smell like cherries or raspberries, and there's several different forms in Georgia, but again rare. And the mountain green pitcher plant, there's one population near Lake Chatou in Towns County, Georgia, still existing. It's always been rare, getting rarer.
What about some of the other plants? I noticed some really interesting plants that we're going to be planting. Some of them you said were companion plants already growing with the pots. But then we have some that we're adding. Do you want to talk about a few of those?
Yeah, sure. Well, here's one of the coolest ones because it's also carnivorous. These are a bunch of red threadleaf sundews. Botanically, it's Drosera filiformis, variety Florida red. And in nature, this is rare. It grows in the Florida Panhandle around one or two small lakes on the shoreline. But the species filiformis is far north as New Jersey. It's usually just not as red as this. But I started with 6 plants and I have thousands of them in my ball garden. They seed readily.
They're not that hard, I guess.
No, and they're great gnat catchers. If you look close, these leaves are just covered in gnats. You even catch crane flies sometimes.
Maybe mosquitoes.
Yeah. So that's a really cool one. And there's several other kinds of sundews that grow naturally in bogs. Many of them are small and you have to get up close to find them. So let me see if I can find a, let's see, I think all those pots ended up out in the bog area already. There's the paddle leaf sundew, which make it 2 or 3 inches across. There's in some of those pots there, so you'll get them in here eventually. So those are 2 carnivorous plants that are companion plants. This thing here is called cardinal flower, or Lobelia cardinalis. It's actually one of our most beautiful native flowering plants, and it loves open wetlands. It'll bloom in late summer with a tall stalk of brilliant scarlet red flowers that hummingbirds love. Now it's very readily, it'll seed readily, so you might be pulling some of it out of here in a few years, but
it's funny
I brought you a good supply.
It dies in my yard, but it grows in my little bog.
Yeah.
That's where it grows.
They have to have damp soil to do well. Yeah. This weird thing here that looks kind of like a pin cushion, it's just starting to grow. This is giant bog hatpins. The genus is Areocolon. The species is undescribed, but it will make flower stalks in late summer that look like an old-fashioned hat pin that would go in a Victorian lady's hat, and they actually can be dried and kept in dried arrangements.
It sounds like, Mark, this bog would be interesting like 12 months out of the year.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Worth putting that extra effort to do one maybe at your own home. Can we talk a little bit about some of the orchids that actually grow can grow in a bog?
Yeah, and unfortunately nothing's in bloom quite yet. I brought you several pots that have this. Believe it or not, those are baby orchids. This is called rose begonia orchid. They're actually just about to make a little flower bud. They make a stalk with 1 single leaf and a little bract with 1 or 2 or rarely 3 beautiful lavender pink catleya flowers. Here in Atlanta, you might get them by now. Where I'm at further north, they're going to bloom in late May.
How many orchids, different types of orchids grow naturally in Georgia, maybe in a bog specifically?
Yeah.
Ish. You go ish on us.
At least a dozen different species, for sure. You have grass pinks, which I wasn't able to share any of those with you. They're more slow to spread. Ladies' tresses orchids. That's what these leaves are right here. And they bloom late they won't bloom until October or November. That's more the rose begonia there. That's just in some sphagnum moss. It spreads by thin little rhizomes, so it will cover a large area fairly quickly compared to most other orchids. Some of the fringed orchids grow in bogs. Again, they're pretty rare and they don't multiply quickly, so I didn't have any to share with you, but maybe in the future.
And of course, you got some more common than the rest of it. Some of the ferns, I guess that's royal fern and that chain fern.
Jane.
All right, so maybe let's talk about the irises, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about people maybe growing their own bogs, and a little bit about your nursery, how people can get plants and how they can learn to grow these plants.
Sure. Okay. Well, quick, I just brought two kinds of iris. This is actually called the Savanna iris. It's a slender little plants that are connected by long rhizomes, so it never makes a clump. They kind of space themselves out, but they get a gorgeous, deep, vibrant, indigo purple flower that looks like a trident on them, and they'll be blooming fairly soon. And this is blue flag iris, Iris virginiana. So this makes a larger, clear sky blue flower. It's very pretty.
Can that one take a little less moist situations too?
It can, but in a moist situation, it'll grow all that much better.
Awesome. So a little bit about how many greenhouses do you have of orchids and pitcher plants, and how much do you grow, and what is the name of your nursery? So, and can people buy from you? All those kind of things.
They can.
Little promotion, because a lot of people want to know.
My company is Marble Branch Farms, and that may sound big, but it's like a one-man show. I have one orchid greenhouse. It's 92 feet long. I built it myself. And I have a large bog garden, actually bigger than what you're installing here, and I grow many of those each year from seed, kind of trying to cross together the best of the best so that I come out with really good results. You can have a bog garden in a bucket if you just want a couple plants. I've seen some spectacular patio plantings. You've got a sunny patio where nothing else does well. You can just find a container. You want a container that's drainless and is not going to break if it freezes. So, ceramic's not a good idea, but plastic, metal, fiberglass, things like that can expand with freezing and thawing, because they can take down to 0 Fahrenheit and not be bothered at all. So it's never going to get cold enough in Georgia to hurt your plants. But you want to fill it with sand and a little bit of peat moss, and that maybe punch some holes into the top so that it doesn't fill all the way up with rainwater and sit flooded. They actually don't like to be flooded for long periods of time. They could take a short amount of times, but not permanently, or they actually would die. So you want to get some little holes in there to weep out excess water, or fill it all the way to the brim. A lot of times what I do is I'll take a container, I'll fill it all the way to the brim with some media, and I'll sink an empty pot into the center of it, because it shows me where the water table is inside that container. So if my container's that deep, my pot's that deep, when there's no more water visible in the pot, I'll just dump a bucket of water in, and that'll make sure that it never has a chance to dry out if it rains.
I've heard some people would actually do like a clay, which problem is it breaks, I guess, clay tube in the middle of it, and it kind of seeps water in it.
Yeah, if you use like a nursery pot with holes in the bottom, it works the same way. It's a lot cheaper.
A lot cheaper.
It won't break.
Yeah.
So I do sell carnivorous plants online, actually, but I sell them as a collection because they're so distinct. Even if I do just cross a species to itself, the individual plants are going to vary one to the next, as some might be a little more outstanding. So I usually sell like a collection of starter plants, and I'll give you a variety of them. But anybody who is interested in very specific species could simply contact me and get more. So my company is Marble Branch Farms, and my website is marblebranchfarms.com. So pretty simple.
Awesome. What else do you grow? Because I know it's not just pitcher plants. Just talk a little bit about what else you grow.
Yeah, well, I grow orchids for a living. I actually do some own hybridization. Neither would be considered quick plants from seed. A Sarracenia or bog pitcher plant is going to take, in nature, between 5 and 7 years to reach adult blooming size from seed. I can speed that up in my greenhouse a little bit. Orchids kind of the same way, 5 to 7 years from seed. So it's a labor of love when you grow them. My property is a botanical garden. I love plants, so I've been growing stuff my entire life. So I've got examples of rare flowering trees and shrubs.
That's great, Mark. We really appreciate your time. And is there anything else you'd like to let us know before we head off? Are there any questions that we might need to have answered?
Water quality. That might be an issue. In this part of the country, we use tap water. That's not a problem. Our tap water is actually acidic. But if you live in a part of the country where you have a lot of dissolved minerals in the water, that's a 100 parts per million greater. The water gets to the plants, they will eventually suffer. So rainwater is nothing but best, but in this area, tap water is
Is she broadcasting?
I don't know
Ask
about
her
Michelle, if you have any
you have to-
questions for us. We'll try to answer them for you, but otherwise, information will be starting shortly. Really appreciate it for the time.
Are they picking up the audio? Is she on the phone?
Up,
She's on the phone. On the bar. Ask her. You not see him? Make sure she made a switch.
A lot of different plants, and it's very doable. I've had a farm for about 4 or 5 years. I'm a fairly green thumb that has like a hand that it's just give it dry out. Right, Mark? Do one thing. Dry out. That's not this time to take care of yourself.
Sorry about the interruption right now. We're gonna be back with Greg in 1 second. Let us know if you have any more questions for Greg. He's switching to show some other areas, and we will have a Q&A session in a minute.
Put it this way.
Okay, we're back live?
Back live.
Wait a second. Is she?
Left off.
We're back on. See if please broadcast back to Judy's camera.
You're still, yeah,
Welcome back to the show about Longleaf Pine Forest and the technical difficulties. In another few weeks, will be gone completely, but this is new to us, so we're doing our best. But Mark, I just had to ask Mark, where are some places that you can actually see these in nature? One specifically in Alabama, that he thinks is more open.
Yeah. The thing is that most natural populations are not in public places these days because the ones that were in public places have been destroyed by development. When I was a teenager, you could drive down I-10 in Panhandle of Florida or other interstate highways and just see them on the side of the road in the ditches and places. That is extremely rare these days. But there is a specific preserve that is open to the public called Splinter Hill Bog in Baldwin County, Alabama. It's only a couple miles off Interstate 65. And if you go there late in the season, September onwards, you'll see the white top pitcher plant in populations that you can't imagine. It goes to the horizon and it's really spectacular. So that would be one that I would recommend. In the Okefenokee, you might see there's floating colonies. So if you take like a canoe trip, you might a pitcher plant called Sarracenia minor variety Okefenensis, and it grows on floating mats of vegetation.
When's the best time to do that in Okefenokee? It's a place probably people would.
Well, you know, in terms of seeing the plants at
Just see
their
the
best,
plants. See the plants.
it's going to be probably mid to late summer.
Okay.
Weather-wise, maybe not so great.
Mosquitoes too.
Yeah. Most pitcher plants actually sprout late because they flower first, and they don't want to catch their pollinators, so they will bloom first, and they will produce no good leaves until after those flowers have faded away and aren't going to try.
So they
to
pollinate first and then eat them later.
Yeah, yeah.
Like some insects do that, right?
Yeah. Well, it's mostly bee pollinated, and they don't catch a lot of
Right.
bees, but they do mostly make leaves after they have flowered.
You know, my last
You know,
question.
this is a flower that's done.
Yeah,
So there were
petals.
petals hanging off of this, 5 of them, and they're gone now. So now it's going to try and make a seed pod right there in the center. And those seeds will take the whole growing season to become ripe. And they'll ripen in usually September or October.
And Mark, I guess my last question for you is to make this relevant to people who are just interested in it. You know, are there organizations that are actually helping conserve these places, and who are they? And who? And you know, can you name some of those and maybe fill in why they're important to people who may not appreciate the plant or the animal? Why these bogs are important in pine forests and Longleaf pine.
There's actually many organizations trying to preserve what's left. If you wanted to join something, there is the National Sarracenia Conservancy, and it's a small annual membership, and they put their money into education. So that's one in particular. You can also join the Carnivorous Plant Society. That's where you can get seed. In fact, the Carnivorous Plant Society, if you are a member, you're open to their seed bank, and other members contribute seed to it, and you can get, if you want to start from seed, things that you would not be able to find easily otherwise. There are not a lot of commercial places where you can buy mature carnivorous plants. Most are actually in the West. In California, there's a couple, in Oregon, but not so many here in the East.
Are there any large conservancy groups that buy lots of land that kind of hold, maybe not specifically about that? Or...
Well, the Nature Conservancy is one. In South Carolina, where I live, we have something called heritage preserves, and the state itself actually buys land to protect it. So a huge chunk of habitat in South Carolina is now protected through the Department of Natural Resources. I wish they had something like that in Georgia.
We actually have something called GOSA now, where we where they just recreational tax can buy forested lands or nature land. So hopefully they'll buy some of the leftover bogs that are around. I guess with that, do you see? Is there anything that would make it specifically important to people that may not care about the plants, but from an environmental standpoint, does it help with filtering water, floods, anything that specifically?
Well, certainly all of those. I mean, those lands are our natural water filters. They help keep the groundwater pure. They help to keep the floods from becoming a problem, from being excessive runoff. So
and of course, water sustains all life. So if you're not cleaning the water, then we have dirty water and sick people.
It's really important to protect as much habitat as we possibly can and restore it where possible. The Atlanta Botanical Garden has been involved in restoring locations where some species in this state have become exceedingly rare. The mountain purple pitcher plant and the coastal purple pitcher plant, for instance, there's like one population of each left, and they're trying to propagate them and extend it out. But in order to do that, they have to clear the habitat of the undergrowth that has occurred over time.
So that kind of leads into why we're doing this. It's hard to see pitcher plant bogs in Atlanta. Atlanta Botanical Gardens is a great place, but not as easily accessible as the Beltline, where over 1 million visitors, I think 1.75 million visitors were on last year. So this arboretum is an opportunity for people to see what is out in nature and what we should be protecting and why we should be protecting it. So as this grows in and fills out, we'll have more educational opportunities. Maybe Mark will come back where we can talk a little bit even closer than we already are, 6 feet, not quite there. But we have more conversations about that. And hopefully you can visit this, support some of these other nonprofits along with Trees Atlanta to help them protect these wonderful places that are disappearing in Georgia, and we should protect what's left. So with that, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being patient with us. The next program will go much smoother by Saturday. So thank you.
Greg, there's a question in the chat here for Mark.
Okay. Go ahead. I guess a question for Mark.
Yeah, the question, somebody's saying that he remembers finding a field of what is called button
Mark is going
plant.
to take a question, and Judy's going to ask it.
Okay, let me repeat.
Okay,
Go ahead and
perfect.
tell me.
Yeah, so it's this plant that he used to call button plants.
Sharing.
And hi, Mark.
Hi.
All right, so the question is, I remember finding a field of what I called button plants in a bog on the side of the road going down to New Orleans. Do you know what's this plant?
Well, they probably were similar to the bog hat pins that I showed y'all earlier. They're not in bloom this time of year, but there's a bunch of different species, and they grow in wetlands, but they'll grow in ditches too. So that's probably what it was. Yeah, some of the sundews also will grow just in roadside ditches very easily. If you go to any roadside ditch in South Georgia or the Florida Panhandle, get out and look, and you might find some amazing things.
Another question is more of how can we do this at home, right? So the question is, if you're planting these and other fire-dependent species like longleaf pines into your property, is there anything you'll need to do in order to maintain them
Well, you can,
You repeat the
without
question?
setting
Oh, you can hear it. Never mind.
someone's yard on fire?
sure, obviously, what you can do is just simply manually keep the undergrowth down. That's what the fire does in nature. But you can just clip back or pull weeds or whatever it takes to keep the space more open so they do well. Yeah, I don't burn my bog garden, but I do clip it all back at the end of winter and kind of clean out the leaves and things that have accumulated. So, does that help?
That's great, yeah. And then related to the
We're going
previous
to wrap it up,
question,
everybody. And remember, we have another talk at the Stumpery, which is in Reynoldstown on the east side of the BeltLine Arboretum this Saturday with Kelly Ridenour, who is our BeltLine Arboretum manager, and she is our associate director. So looking forward to having y'all join us on Saturday. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
It wasn't internet till I was 40 years old.
All right. Nice job, y'all. Yay.